Chapter 434. A strange feeling had washed over him. Despite being yelled at and scolded, it didn't feel bad. It felt as though he had returned to an almost forgotten childhood. Did you two have a fight or something? You guys are being so loud. Perhaps, having heard Anon's innocent complaints, the drinkers finally leaned in. Mick, flushed from alcohol, nonchalantly draped an arm over Anon and neither, linking arms with both. What's going on? Nothing at all. Upon either's denial, Mick chuckled as if he didn't care, the scent of alcohol heavy on his breath. Kana, arriving a bit late, also looked flushed as she scrutinized either. Really? You didn't fight? I thought either got scolded by the pharmacist. Though she tried to make her eyes sharp, this was probably the most effortless facial expression Kana had ever displayed. It seemed pretty clear that she had drunk more than her usual amount. Ah, Kana, you wanted to see the monster, right? Here it is. Before either could answer, Mick lightly tapped the cage that contained the monster, immediately drawing everyone's attention. Yidr and Anon exchanged a silent signal that seemed to say their conversation should end here. We are done with our research, so we were thinking of naming the creature, but we haven't come up with any good ideas yet. Can you just name a monster like that? Of course, if you are the first to discover a new monster, anyone can name it. Since the cavalry, the Duke, and the Western Mage Union didn't give it a name, it's left to us, isn't it? I see. I didn't know that. It's understandable. So many new monsters appear every year that it's pointless to get caught up in names. Still, if you want to make it easier for anyone involved, it's better to those who discovered the monster name it themselves. Helm interjected. Would you two mind helping us think of a name while you are here? Kana frowned as she looked down at the monster. Naming it wouldn't be a pleasant task, given that she remembered the havoc this monster had wreaked in the Great Serene Forest. For reference, I suggested the name Pen Pen, which Grandma thought was too tame. Pen Pen? It's what they call a doll made of bundled straw in the northern regions. Don't you think it looks a bit like that? It didn't look like that at all. Kana seemed to share Yidr's opinion, avoiding eye contact. That's nonsense. You can't give a monster such a cutesy name. There is no legal rule against it. Anyway, no one's going to call it by that name, and it will be forgotten soon. So, why not just go with something arbitrary? Mick argued vigorously against Helm's rebuke. Yidr felt a sense of unfamiliarity in one part of what he had said. It will be forgotten soon. Is that so? This time, it will be. In his previous life, Pethomet had inflicted enormous damage upon the Empire, so they had named it after a demon in the legends to serve a long-standing point of reference. He could have suggested naming this monster Pethomet again, but Yidr decided against it. This time, it felt far better to go with an insignificant name, just like Mick had suggested. What do you think, Yidr? I think Mr. Mick's opinion is reasonable. Really? Kana wore an expression that seemed to doubt Yidr's taste. See, the assistant knows what's up. Mick laughed heartily, looking satisfied. Helen sighed and suggested that they think about it a little more. Yidr found himself gazing at a small monster, its tail tinged with a shade of purple. It felt threatened as people crowded around it. Suddenly, he remembered once again the research objectives of the first Duke Dane: to find out where the monsters came from. Sacred texts imbued with the words of God explain the existence of monsters as a curse from the Black Moon, though the power of the Black Moon had been overpowered and hidden from the world by those who demonstrated the strength of the sun god the cursed blood was said to still remain. When given an opportunity, it would seep into the world, manifesting as monsters. Whether one was devout or not, the origin of monsters was generally accepted. Ask anyone other than Yidr, and they would give no more explanation. But what if the first Duke Dane thought otherwise? It's as if questioning whether God really exists, Yidr mused. Though his thoughts might differ if he spoke with Enon, it seemed best to reserve that conversation for another time. While Yidr was lost in thought, the topic of conversation among the group changed once again. Helen took a sip from her glass of liquor as she listened to Kana talk about the poor relations between the cavalry and the Imperial Knights. In particular, Kiol from the house of Diarca had even challenged Yidr to a duel. The youngest of the house of Diarca? He's grown that old already? Wow, Grandma Helen, do you also know that knight? Know him? Let's just say he left an impression because he was so audacious. Why? Yidr had been disinterested until Kiol's name came up, but now it was a different story. When Kiol was born, the Duke of Diarca directly asked the Empress to name his son, and the name the Empress bestowed used far too many letters that were intentionally similar to those of the second Prince Kishir at the time, which created a big uproar. Yidr hadn't expected the conversation to suddenly involve Kishir. As Yidr turned his head, Kana cautiously asked, "Was it such a big deal?" A big deal indeed. No noble would dare to name their child so closely to that of a prince or princess destined to lead the nation. Historically unprecedented, it cast doubt on their intentions. It was a move that made many uncomfortable. Helen seemed to hold some certainty about this, despite cutting her sentence short. The characters in the Emperor's and Lord Kishir's contain sounds that were chosen intentionally by the previous emperor to emulate a hero he admired, adhering to the royal naming conventions. However, the Duke of Diarca, knowing this, subtly crossed the line right from the time he named his first child. Finally, by the time he named Kiol, the similarity between Kishir and Kiol's name became a topic of gossip and exploded in the public eye. It might sound like a small, old dispute over the names of children, but there seemed to be a deeper story beneath it. However, Helen didn't elaborate any further. She simply stared at the little liquor left in her glass and let out a deep sigh. Enough of these uninteresting old tales. Drinking makes it all the less enjoyable. She drained her remaining drink and suggested it was time to truly rest. Mick, who had drunk the most yet still wanted more, was disappointed, but Yidr had no complaints. "I apologize for coming so late. I should be on my way now." "You're welcome any time, but before you go, Yidr, would you call me Grandma just once?" Although he agreed, Yidr found it a little difficult. "I apologize. Please consider me as being respectful to the degree of calling you Madam Helen. I have thought this since I first met you. You're quite stubborn. Now I see why my lord wanted to keep you by his side. ... Yidr was silent, not knowing how to respond, and Helen quietly smiled. "However, I think it would be better if Kana stays here for the night." Yidr turned his head and found Kana, who had been extremely drowsy, in her seat. Seeing her nodding off, it was clear that walking back together was out of the question. "That seems best. She can sleep in my room. I will send her home tomorrow." "Thank you." As Helen took care of Kana, Mick and Enon bid Yidr farewell.